We want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming and taking time for our webinar today. I know that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. So if you're just joining us, make sure that you say hello to us in the chat box. We do have a Q&A box. And so as you're going and you're hearing from our expert, Lindsey, if you have questions, please put them in there. And Jeremy Adams, who's our communication specialist, will be monitoring that. We are going to start with a poll. And so if you see the poll on your screens today, if you can answer just from 1 to 10, how comfortable do you feel in your knowledge of building resiliency in children, with 1 being not very comfortable and 10 being highly comfortable? Let us know how you're feeling as you enter into the webinar today. I am going to go ahead. Again, I am Carissa Figgins. I'm the Executive Director of Community Strong. We're a health and wellness coalition commissioned by the Economic Development Council of St. Charles County, BJC St. Peter's and Progress West, SSM St. Charles County, Mercy, and St. Luke's. And our goal is to create a culture and inspire a culture of health and well-being in St. Charles County. We primarily do that through 3 pillars that have been introduced through the Community Health Needs Assessment, of focusing on substance use disorder, chronic diseases, and workplace wellness. And of course, in the middle of COVID, some of those things obviously take a back seat. And so one of the things that we felt very strongly as our team is how we could cut through the noise and confusion that's caused through COVID is to really focus on something that can benefit all of us. And we can all learn from this, and it's something that we'll hold on to. So we started these webinar series on resiliency. So a couple weeks ago, we focused on resiliency as leaders in the workplace and as senior managers, of how it's our duty to build up those skills and attitudes. Obviously, this week we have Lindsey Hopkins with us from the Child Center, of the importance of building up resiliency in children. And next week we will have Kristen Ertz with Bowie to share with us how to have resiliency and combat caregiver fatigue during this time. And then we'll wrap up the webinar series with Jeremy Mulick from Big Wide Sky and talk about what resiliency is going to look like in the future. So if you are just joining us, so say hello in the chat box and participate in our poll. I am going to go ahead and introduce Lindsey Hopkins. She is a child and family advocate at the Child Center. If you're not familiar, the Child Center is one of those beautiful gyms that we have in St. Charles County. It's our child advocacy center that serves child victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and children who witness violent crimes. Lindsey began her education at St. Charles Community College, where she received her associate's degree in human services. Next, Lindsey received her bachelor's degree in social work and child advocacy certificate from UMSL. And then finally, Lindsey received her master's in social work with an emphasis in family practice from UMSL. And so you can see that throughout the 2,000 plus hours that she has of internships in her education, and just her service through St. Joe Community Care Services, the St. Charles County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, the Child Center, and the Children's Advocacy Center. Oh my goodness, today's just a stutter day. Children's Advocacy Services of Greater St. Louis. She's extremely well versed in what we're talking about. And she is very, we can rely on her to be the source of information for us today of how we can all help children in our lives build resiliency, especially during these current times. And so I'm going to go ahead and send everything over to Lindsey. So thank you, Lindsey, for being with us today.
Perfect. Thank you. So if you all can just kind of bear with me for one moment, I'm going to share my screen to get my presentation up. So one second here. All right, can you all see that PowerPoint here? Okay. All right, so thank you, Carissa. I'm really excited to be talking about this subject today. In times now, I think this is something that is very, very important for all of us to be able to empower our children. As you heard, my experience working with children and families in specifically a crisis situation or children who've experienced trauma, I have seen many examples of how resiliency in children is very prominent. So I'm excited to talk about this today. I do also want to let you all know that I will be using some examples that I have seen in my work about how children have overcome crisis and trauma. So I'm not going into a lot of detail, but I do want to let you know I will be sharing those experiences that I've seen through my work. I also really want you all to ask me any questions that you all have. I have a lot of experience working with families and everything like that. So please have any questions, please let me know throughout this presentation. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to do, obviously, is understand what is resilience, understanding why it's important for us as caretakers or professionals to instill resiliency in our children. Then the next thing we want to do is, obviously, how do we build that in our children? And I will kind of walk you through some resources on how you can continue to support your children as a professional or a caregiver. So we will go ahead and get started. So resiliency, I'm sure most people have heard of what is resiliency. And the biggest thing I think that we think of when we hear this word is being able to bounce back. And that's exactly what that means. It's someone's ability to recover or overcome a crisis situation, stress, adversity, or change. I think that we can all attest right now that things are a little bit different and change is very, very prominent for us as adults as much as it is for our kiddos. So with resilience, how do we actually bounce back? What does that look like? That's what we'll be walking through this presentation. But first thing, being able to bounce back is essentially coping with those hardships, with those crisis situations. Obviously, resilience is definitely a process. We can't expect that we are going to be perfect every second of every day, and that's okay. So we may have a really, really great day and we were able to cope with stressful situations as adults. And the next day, maybe we didn't cope so well with some of the things that have been a challenge in our lives, and that's okay. So as you continue to build resiliency with your children, give them that same flexibility too, that this is a process. We all have to learn some way, somehow, and that we have to be able to as well overcome those situations too. We as caregivers, so I'm going to use the word caregiver. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about anyone who's taking care of children, an adult, a professional. Kiddos look up to us in every way, shape, or form. So they're definitely looking at how do we handle situations. And this plays a really big part in making sure that we also understand what resilience is ourselves as adults. So now that we have all this change going on, what is probably one of the biggest things kids are experiencing right now? Change in what? Probably school. So most kids can say that they don't like school, but I think as all of us can attest as caregivers, we're definitely seeing how kiddos are really missing that piece. It was something that is, not all of them always look forward to going to school. However, that was something that was a constant in their life. Now that has been kind of disrupted. And now they're also trying to figure out, how do we cope with that? We as adults are trying to figure out, how do we cope with not knowing when everything is going to open back up, or I'm working from home and then the next day I'm not. So there's a lot of unknown for us as adults, and that's what our children are experiencing too. So that's one of the biggest changes that probably children are going through right now. So now that we kind of understand that resiliency is defined as a situation that is a crisis setting, stress, or change, and being able to bounce back or overcome those situations, I'm going to take you through some examples of how children have been able to overcome a lot of difficult situations. This is kind of where I'm talking a little bit about what I have seen in my work. People ask me all the time, how do you work in these situations with kids who've endured some of the toughest things that no child should ever have to endure? And I have to say that the resilience of children is a very beautiful thing. One of the first things, which I will probably mention many times throughout this presentation, as one thing that the child really, really needs, is having a supportive caregiver in place. I'll walk you through that in a few minutes, but I think that in order for a child to be resilient, obviously they have to have support, but sometimes we see kids who don't have any support, and it's something internally that I think is pretty amazing for them to be able to cope with the situations that they were presented. So I'm going to walk you through some situations that we have seen at the Child Center and throughout my work as a social worker. All experiences these children have overcome by themselves with support. So one of the biggest things is seeing a child be able to confront or testify in front of their abuser. I don't know about you, but I would think as an adult that would have to be a really hard thing to do. And with the support of professionals or their caretakers, they are able to testify in front of that person who did something very harmful to them. And how amazing is it that they can do that? That's so brave of them to be able to go in the courtroom with people that they don't know and strangers and be able to share their story. We see it every day here when kiddos come to us, that they are telling a complete stranger something very traumatic that has happened to them. And that is an amazing, resilient thing to do. The next thing is I've seen children who have lived in really awful situations, whether that be, what I like to call complex traumas. So they've had many traumatic events happen in their life. They're able to not only advocate and be the voice for themselves, which we as adults should be their voice. However, sometimes that's not the case for many children, and they have to be their voice. That's another example of resiliency. I've seen children who have really, really needed help, and they've reached out to so many different people because they weren't able to get that within their family unit. So when they say that children are resilient, I can promise you that they are. Whether they have supports from their caregivers or not, they still possess an amazing capability to overcome life stressors and challenges. And this is why it's important to teach kiddos that you're working with, your own children, how to teach them to be their own voice, and also how to cope with situations that aren't very, that are harmful and stressful. Because in life, obviously these are some pretty traumatic experiences, and we obviously never want a child to ever have to go through this. But also life presents some challenging situations, like right now with COVID-19, our kiddos are missing school and their peers, and how do we help them cope with these situations? That's all instilling resilience within your child. So I think we just kind of talked about why this is important. There's so many different factors on why resilience is important for our kids. First and foremost, it really just helps their overall well-being, child development, being able to problem solve different situations that may be presented to them. It also helps promote confidence and self-esteem, helping them feel more confident with when they're having a difficult day or a situation that they are able to problem solve and feel confident in that they can overcome that with coping skills or just understanding that things are tough right now, but I can handle this. This is what I'm going to do. Also, being able to kind of regulate their emotions, identify feelings is a big thing. Obviously, we as adults, or just I think our society in general, we don't like talking about feelings at all. However, it is important for our children to be able to identify when they're having a feeling of anger or being upset. Why are they feeling that way? And figuring out, using that problem solving skill of how can I manage that anger, that frustration, that sadness, and what is causing that? Being able to walk through different situations of crisis or stress, helping your child be able to process through that and what they can do to make sure that they're feeling safe and secure when a crisis is presented with them. A good example of this would be a child who maybe got not such a great grade on a test. So for example, I'm going to use math because math is a hard thing, I think. So I'm going to walk you through this, just a little example. So if a child comes home from school, they got a D on a math test, and they're really, really mad and upset because they got that D. Well, you as a parent or a caregiver, help them walk through that situation. Okay, you got a D on your test. Did you study for your test? Yes or no? Walk through that. Okay, well, help them identify that they are trying as best as if they can. The next thing you need to do is, okay, well, what can we look at next time? What can we do next time to make sure the grade is a little bit higher? Being able to walk through those situations and problem solve and problem shoot that situation. That way, next time, if they do get a D, they're able to identify, I did study, I did do all the right things, but maybe I should try again. Maybe I should get a tutor. just some examples of being able to help promote that resiliency for the child. So first of all, I really like quotes, and I think this is a really great quote, so I will read it out to you. So resilience is not all or nothing. It comes in amounts. You can be a little resilient, a lot resilient in some situations, but not others. And no matter how resilient you are today, you can become more resilient tomorrow. I think that's something that's really, really important. Giving yourself as a caregiver a little bit of flexibility and grace, and knowing that, you know what, like I said in the beginning, some days you will handle situations fantastic and sometimes not. Helping not only yourself see that, but also your kids see that, and letting them not have that kind of self-sabotage and making themselves feel guilty that, you know, if they did get a bad grade on something, helping them see that they did try everything that they could. And sometimes I've seen kids who get really, really upset about things. They're trying to do the best they can. And sometimes they don't have that support there that encourages them and empowers them. And that's exactly what a child needs. A child needs that support and empowerment from a caregiver or a professional, whoever that might be. Kids thrive on that. So continue to support your kids in the best way, shape, and form that you can, because they really, really thrive on that. And like I said earlier, resilience is definitely a process. So give yourself a flexibility in trying to promote resilience as well. So now that we kind of understand the definition of resilience, how important it is, and hearing those examples of children, who have overcome crisis, we obviously see that children are very resilient. They can overcome situations that are very stressful and very scary. And with that being said, that gives us so much hope for, even if our children don't experience a trauma or something pretty significant, like in the examples we've heard, we know that our children can handle certain types of stress. They just need you as that caregiver to help empower them and help promote that within themselves. So now we'll do just a little bit. I do have a video in here, which we'll get to that in a minute, but this is now a part about how you can build resiliency in your child. So whether you're a professional or a caretaker, whatever that might look like, these are just some examples on how important it is and ways you can build that with a child. So like I said before, I said I'd probably say this many times, the number one thing a child needs is you as a caregiver, as a professional. They need you to empower them. They need your support. They need to know that if something really, really scary happens or they have a really bad day, that they can come to you and that you will be supporting them through that process. That is really, really what every child needs, is a supportive caregiver to help them in this process. Okay, so I'll play this video in a moment, but I want to kind of look through these. So these are what are called protective factors, or they can be characteristics of what a child should possess or an adult should possess to be resilient. So protective factors means that it's something that an individual possesses that is a healthy characteristic or a healthy attribute that that person possesses. So making sure, number one, that the child has a supportive caregiver or a community is very impactful for the child's progress, healing, really just everything in life that a child needs is a supportive caregiver. The next thing that's really important for children, especially now, I think that we can all attest that children definitely need some routine now that they are not in school. Kids really thrive on having a schedule and a routine. I'm sure most of you, if you are parents out there, you guys have kind of had to look through some ways to kind of have those different types of routines, what's working, what's not working. If you are from a two-parent household, maybe mom and dad work every day, and now they're both at home. And now what do we do with the kids? So trying to figure out some type of routine will be helpful for a child to have that structure and stability. Next is having good coping skills in place. So yes, as you all have heard, I'm a social worker through and through. So I really think that coping skills are very, very effective and really help. Making sure that the children know that if If you're feeling angry, what do I do? Do you have 5 seconds to do some deep breathing? Can you go outside for a little bit? Walking through some coping skills with your kids is very, very important. It also helps you as a parent because you too can get stressed and overwhelmed. And what do you do to take care of yourself? Do you take 5 minutes to breathe? What do you do for you as well? So instilling some type of coping skill for your kids is important. Finally, just the pureness of playing, being active, and being creative. I think right now is a really wonderful time for that to happen. Whether you're working from home and your kids are there, and yes, that might be super stressful, but this is a really great opportunity for you as a caregiver to build more of a relationship with your kiddos and having that time to play. Maybe you establish a routine and you play Uno or a board game at 5 o'clock, or you do some type of movie night, making sure you're active with your kids and making sure, again, the more active you are, the more you build that relationship as a more supportive caregiver. Play is so important for kids no matter what age. That is kind of their coping skill, is being able to play, draw, color, whatever that might look like, making sure that you're making time for your kids to have that space to do so. It is shown, and you'll see this in the video that I show in a few minutes, it is shown that the more protective factors or the more healthy coping that a child has, the more resilient they are. And that those protective factors should outweigh the negative. And that's really what we want to instill. And another thing I really want to add is that we all play a part in promoting and empowering resilient children. So whether you have kids or you don't have kids, you as an individual are responsible to in keeping children safe, and also empowering those children to become more resilient in times of crisis and stress. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm going to attempt to play this video. If not, I can also. Okay. I also have the captioning on as well.
So Lindsey, I don't believe that we can see the video.
Okay.
Playing. Is it a screen that you can share on your side that's opened up in a new screen perhaps?
I will probably just go ahead and just link it. Is there a way that I can send it out to everyone?
Yeah, I think we can put it in the chat box, or we can definitely send it out.
Okay, perfect. I will put it in there. But it's essentially everything that I just said. So I will add it to, or give it to Carissa to share out. All right, so here are just some ideas and tips to help build that resilience piece within your kiddos. So first and foremost, just the idea of just talking with your kids. Tell me all about your day. If anyone from the Child Center is watching, they know that this is something that we use all the time. Tell me all about. That gives individuals an opportunity to be open and share anything that they want. Kids love kind of sharing a little bit about their day. Maybe they had a really great day and they're like, everything was great today, and asking them, tell me the best part of your day, exploring more about that. And then tell me something that you didn't like about your day. And maybe that's an opportunity for you and your child to be able to walk through and problem solve how to handle a situation differently. Another thing is to keep things in perspective. I'll show you a quote in a few minutes, and I think that's really, really important for us as adults to also understand. Especially during these times, everyone is having a difficult time with this pandemic. And I know for myself, I try to keep it in perspective as, yes, this is a very difficult time. However, we've seen people really come together as a community to help support and empower everybody. So I think that's pretty amazing. So helping your kids understand the importance of keeping things in perspective as well. Like I've said before, encourage and support your kids. Helping them understand that emotions are okay to have. What you do with those emotions are also important. So obviously we don't want our children to become angry and then punch a hole in the wall. So maybe promoting some type of coping skill to help with that. Maybe that's going outside and playing for a few minutes, whatever that might look like, exploring and helping them identify feelings about a situation that maybe was a little bit more challenging for them. And just going outside, going outside and play different activities. I know board games is a really great thing to do, especially if you're wanting to problem solve. Those are some characteristics of building resiliency in a child, is problem solving through different situations. Establishing that routine that I was just talking about. That's super important. Like I said, children really thrive on having some type of structure and routine. So making sure that you're implementing something like that. Whether that means I think I just said this a few minutes ago, every night at 5 o'clock, we're going to play a board game together, or, having something in place for the child to have some type of predictability is important. Implementing self-care for not only your child, but also for you. And I think that there is another series talking about caregiver resiliency, and that plays a huge part. Like I said, our children are constantly watching us and seeing how we're handling different situations. But our children are so important too. So we need to be checking in with our kiddos and seeing how they're doing as well. So you as caregivers, and also as just professionals in general, make sure you're taking care of yourself. I know self-care is a thing that nobody likes to talk about. I also teach at the community college, and I know my students don't always like hearing me talk about self-care, but I think it just plays a really helpful role in just so many different things as a professional, for children, taking some time for you, because being a stressed out parent can be very harmful for our kids. So making sure you're taking time for you too. This is a really kind of easy activity that I did find about talking about feelings. Like I said earlier, feelings are something that people really don't like talking about. However, for our kiddos, it's really important that we are talking about feelings and helping them identify what to do if you're having a certain feeling. Going back to that example of anger, a lot of kids, when they get angry, I'm sure all of you parents or anyone working with children can attest that sometimes when kids are angry, they just can be a little bit more challenging. So helping them be able to identify those feelings, walk through that situation, and have some type of coping is important. So as you can kind of see with resiliency, coping mechanisms are very important. Every person really should have some type of a coping mechanism that is healthy for them to utilize. Okay, so this was the quote that I was talking about as far as being able to keep things in perspective. Also being able to reframe certain situations. So it's disappointing when it rains on a sports day, isn't it? Let's make the most of this. What's something we can do on a rainy day that we probably wouldn't do if it was sunny? This really helps give the child a perspective that, yes, I know you want to go outside and play, but let's think through it. What's something that we can do instead? That could be playing a board game. That could be playing their Nintendo Switch. That giving that brief frame and helping them understand, like, yes, this is a situation that's not so fun and we don't like staying in all the time. However, what can we do instead to make the best of this? All right, so now I just want to take some time for you all to kind of think about your own families, or maybe families that you work with. So I want you to think about, what are you currently doing in your family unit to promote resiliency within your family? And then also, what characteristics do you as an adult have that will help promote and be that example for your child? And then what do you as a caregiver do for yourself to reduce overall stress that is healthy? I think that's, again, like I said, it's important for you to take care of yourself. And again, your children are also looking up to you. So make sure that you're kind of reflecting through these things and having that awareness. Okay, I'm going to kind of walk through these resources really fast. So these are some resources, obviously, that I used for my presentation, but there's one here through Sesame Street that I think has probably one of the cutest videos I think I've ever seen for our younger kiddos on how to handle stressful situations. And obviously I can't get my videos to work, but I have attached it here. It's really, really great. They have great videos, great worksheets. So this is something that you could also utilize for your children or children that you might be working with. And then I did link our website, the Child Center. We also are here to help if you have any questions about anything, but we do have some really helpful resources on our website as well.
Lindsay, this has been awesome information, but we do have quite a few questions if I can share those with you.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we have are, what are some easy ways for a grandparent to provide support and help build resilience in your grandkids? It's not getting to spend a lot of time with them, but how can you have a positive impact in short, infrequent visits?
Yeah, so I don't know if they were able to, are they visiting the grandchild? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I think probably they just live close by, but just time and circumstances, they don't get to spend extended time.
Yeah, I think just the pureness of being able to just leave them a call and check in to see how everything's going, and acknowledging that I know things are a little stressful right now with maybe not being able to go to school, or, I as a grandparent don't get to see you as much. How is everything going? And kind of chalking in and checking in with them to see how they're doing. That would be a really good thing. I'm sure kids love to hear from their family members. So that is also super helpful for them to also check in with them.
Excellent. And another question we have is, how do you identify levels of resilience? So we know it looks different in adults, but also kids. So are there good indicators or behaviors or things to ask to kind of gauge where your child's level is and resiliency? Is it waning? Is it strong right now? What are indicators we can look for?
So I think that's a very good question. And I would just say, kind of just as a caregiver, as a parent, being able to assess how they handle certain situations. I'm not sure about any level because I see resiliency as a process. And sometimes, again, things are handled very well, but not so great. So I think that's a really good question. I think you just have to assess them and see, if they come home with not such a great test score, or they had an incident with their friends, assessing how they're handling those situations. I think looking at the coping skills and also looking at how they're problem solving through things is a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder from you that it's not like you've attained this. It's like a process that keeps growing, and that in any process you have setbacks and things step forward. So that's
absolutely.
Always look at this as a process. Another question specifically to the 4-year-old level. The 4-year-old tends to get frustrated and quit really easy and have temper tantrums, but then on the same thing, he'll show resiliency and persistence and things that he really wants to see through. So is that inconsistency pretty typical in children? And then how do you help that kind of build more continuity or consistency in resiliency?
Yeah, so definitely I've worked with little 4-year-olds, and I think that that's appropriate for their development. And with being so young, I think that, again, having that process and continuing to do what you're doing as far as supporting them, or just kind of affirming and pointing praise when they're able to handle a certain situation, and verbalizing that, like, oh, I really like how you handled that situation when you got really mad about, not being able to turn the TV on, something like that for a 4-year-old. And again, 4 I think is a fun age, but also can be really challenging. And again, you just have to kind of go with the flow with that and promote positivity.
I think that ties into the labeling the feelings for them, for anybody the age of the activity worksheet that you provided, but kind of labeling that activity of that behaviors that we want to see, but behaviors that we don't want to see, and just helping them as a really important cue.
Absolutely.
Clue too. Another question that's come through is what would one thing that you would hope caregivers would do to guide them to continue to have healthy responses during this adversity? Word.
I would just say, honestly, I work with caregivers every day, and I would say the biggest thing is to also just really, really take care of you first as well. Because if you are stressed out, obviously it could also trickle down to your kiddo, but also knowing that is not, you can't always you can be stressed as a parent, obviously, but not necessarily showing that in front of your child, or just kind of processing and acknowledging that things are tough right now, and kind of how you can get together as a family and process through. So just taking care of you as a caregiver, I think, is number one.
You know, it's an overused analogy, but the same one of when you're flying on the airplane, that you got to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help the other people beside you.
Absolutely.
A question that's come through: what are signs you will look for that a child's stress is getting too high, or what point should a parent get outside help for their child?
I think that's something, I think every parent is really good at knowing their children very, very well. If you ever have concerns that your child isn't able to handle stress very well, I mean, definitely it doesn't ever hurt to reach out to a professional. I think that reaching out is always a helpful tool, but you know your children best. So I would just say that if you have concerns about that, definitely reach out for extra support.
Excellent. The next question, I may need a little bit of clarification, but maybe it'll make more sense. Can you explain why this is something that can be used all of the time, so that there are examples to reference of times they were successful in dealing with tough situations? So I guess what they're saying is, like, resiliency is not something that we just use during times of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
How do we keep showing our kids that referencing back to tough times that they've had, and using that kind of experience to help them in new situations? Hopefully that's what, Shandy, if that's not exactly what you wanted, if you wanted to clarify in the box, but that's kind of where I'm interpreting it right now.
Okay.
Oh, she said, got it. Woo!
Okay. So sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yes. So explain why this is something that can be used all of the time, not just during crisis time, and they're to use as examples to reference of times they were successful in dealing with tough situations.
Okay. So obviously, just like with coping in general, like, life is stressful in so many different situations, and this is just a kind of a protective factor that I think everyone needs to have. And obviously, so I also teach crisis intervention, and one thing that we talk about is seeing stress or crisis or some type of situation as an opportunity or a danger, and you have these two different paths that you can go down. But acknowledging how you work through kind of a tough situation, and being able to reference back to that, like, remember that time that you were able to overcome that, and kind of processing through that is important. I think that's kind of what you were asking for. I'm not 100% sure.
So yes, I think that was like the point of keeping your own kind of mental file on your kiddo, and when they're going through the next difficult time, that you can say, hey, remember just
that time.
Remember you did this, and to show them that they're building their own resiliency rather than always feeling like we have to pour in. And I think there's that balance of, yes, we need to be the supportive caregiver and the supportive community, but that resiliency comes from inside.
And that's a really good point too, is just kind of identifying things within your child that they do that are strengths within themselves as well.
Yeah. And it helps, we can point that out for them, but to keep showing them that they did it themselves. That
exactly.
They did that time.
And kids love hearing that. So that helps them in so many different ways.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've had. We definitely have time for more if anyone wants to throw any more up in the Q&A box. And even the tough ones, Lindsey, I believe you can send those as a private. I'm still learning all the Zoom stuff, but Lindsey said that you can send those privately or anonymously, and she's more than willing to answer some of those questions that are hard to put out into a public forum as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I do think that we've got, if Thomas or Jeremy, if you can throw up that final poll and see how people are feeling with their understanding of resiliency. And in that, these next few moments, I'll just let you know that we want to thank you so much, Lindsey. Thank you everyone for taking time today for yet another Zoom experience, and hopefully it's something different that you haven't experienced before. We do have the post-webinar survey poll up on the screen, so if you want to mark how comfortable you feel in your knowledge of building resiliency in children, that would be awesome. welcome. I do want to put a plug in for next week, the same time on May 7th. Hard to believe that we're into May already, but May 7th is next week at noon. We'll be joined with Kristen Ernst from Bowie and talking about how we can, as caregivers, start to recognize when we're having caregiver fatigue and how to combat that to take care of the people that we have, and especially in these times when we really need to dig deep in our compassion and we might be feeling some of that compassion fatigue. So just any other questions that we want to have while we have Lindsey? And make sure that you're taking care of the polling. If you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, you can go to communitystроngscc.org. We try to provide resources, again, that deal with workplace wellness, substance use disorder, and chronic diseases such as diabetes, but also just healthy lifestyles. We've been tasked with helping St. Charles County become one of the healthiest counties in the nation, and we do that just by inspiring a culture of health and well-being. So we want to thank you again for being here. Obviously, Lindsey, with the poll, we started off with lots of confidence now that the information that you've shared, they'll be able to apply with the children that are in everyone's lives. So thank you again for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We hope that you have a good day and that you're digging deep for your own resiliency and you're getting one step closer to a healthier you and a healthier community. We'll see you next time.